So, that's kind of fun. What's up, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today, we're diving into the making of some club bangers on the Novation circuits. Mostly the circuit rhythm, but a little bit of circuit tracks as well. And, very appropriately, we've got this DJ Corgi shirt available at the link in the description. Designed by my very good friend Gwen of Coastline Creative, helps keep the channel going. But, that being said, let's jump into the circuits. The goal here was to build up one big tech house-ish, techno-ish, 4 on the floor set on the circuit rhythm, controlling these circuit tracks to give me some extra, well, tracks. I did a dedicated video on how to combine these devices and the many opportunities and pitfalls you might encounter when trying to do so. That'll be linked at the end of this video, as will the full set. So yes, we're really milking this topic for content here because there's a lot of different aspects of it. So right now I want to focus on just how I've built these tracks up because I think there's some fun stuff going on. So let's start with just the rhythm by itself. I'm going to turn this filter all the way up so you can't hear the tracks. I don't want to mess with the volume because I like where it's at. Here's what a beat sounds like just on the rhythm. We keep building. So my kind of standard formula for building up a tech house-ish track was kick on track 1, nice and punchy, with a little bit of distortion. Bass 1 shot, often on track 2. Playing some sort of bass line with, of course, some sidechain. Then, some sort of bass growl. With a bit of reverb on it. Remember, all the tracks on the rhythm are monophonic and in mono, so that reverb is helping us out a lot here by getting us a little bit of stereo width. Then, some standard drums. Some other sort of element. Once again, you can hear that reverb. And a lot of these non-bass elements I will have filtered quite a bit, because that used to be a bass 1 shot, but its bass status has been revoked. Oh yeah, and then this right here, with this delay doing a lot of work. So if I turn that off, little reverb. That really brings it to life in this case. All of this stuff brought in, minus track 8, we'll get to that. It's a vibe. It does the tech house type thing, but it sounds a little bit empty, I think. It's close, but it feels like it's missing something. So here are a couple of things that I've done to make it miss less of something. First of all, track 8, on pretty much every project in this set, is white noise whooshes. It is dedicated to that one purpose. And maybe that seems like a bit much, but I have found it to be incredibly useful to make these tracks sound pro and polished. And you can hear it's got both that downshift and that riser, and they cut each other off, so that just kind of works. If you go and listen to anything on the Beatport top 10 or whatever, you'll probably hear white noise whooshes everywhere. It's such a standard part of this genre, in a lot of cases anyway. Being able to direct the energy of a track with this does a lot, in my opinion, especially for transitioning from one song in a set to another. but it still sounds empty. And that's a problem. So let's bring in the tracks. And the big thing that kicked off my desire to do this setup at all, by the way, is the fact that switching projects on one of the circuits, if you've got them connected via MIDI, which I do here, will switch projects on the other device, as you can probably see. There's a bunch of caveats to that and a bunch of things to keep in mind and a bunch of reasons that it doesn't always work the way you hope it will. That's in the dedicated video on connecting these two devices, but that's not the focus here. So here's without the tracks. Here's with. Just this one frickin' synth track by itself goes such a long way in my mind. Partially because of the movement, partially because of the stereo width, partially because of the extra low end. It adds a vibe that this was missing. I'm going for kind of tracks that you would hear in a club in Night City type beat, and this really got me there very quickly. And now, hey, I can intro with that. Then bring this in, and bring in another synth track. And let me play that by itself. As longtime viewers of the channel may have guessed, these are mostly patches by A Force Truly Evil, the absolute GOAT at this point of making the circuit sound great. There's that white noise whoosh again. And now I can also bring in drum tracks on the tracks, and we're in business. And I can start to work my way through an arrangement and do stuff like an evolving bass line. One of the kind of cool things about being stuck on just one consistent note for so long with a simple bass line like this is that any change of notes sounds monumental. And so when that bass note finally changes, it's so satisfying. At least to me. Also, at the normal speed of a pattern, a note can't go any longer than 16 steps. That's as long as this gate setting here goes. So to get a longer note, you would go to pattern settings and slow your pattern down, which I've already done here, as you can see. And you can slow it down by half, like this, or a quarter. So you can have something ring out up to 4 times as long as 16 steps, which is nice. I use that for longer chord progressions, longer bass notes, all the time. Before I move on from this song and get into the other songs, I do want to get into how I've got these projects set up, because that's probably one of the reasons you clicked on this video. So let's dig into it. And the way that these projects are set up was largely dictated by a couple of decisions. One of the key ones being that I wanted to be able to build up my arrangement on the fly using unmuting mostly. So we start off this project in pretty much the minimum viable element stack. There's not much going on. Very minimal. Then we start to introduce stuff. And each unmuted element is another level of energy. So we're escalating our energy level one element unmute at a time. And I can keep building. And so at this point, we're at kind of a small localized peak. This is pretty much everything stacked, as much complexity as you're gonna get, except for the main hook. So it's a fairly basic, repetitive little section. And now that we've built up to this little localized peak of energy, we're now ready to basically tear all that back down and introduce our main hook, the thing most likely to get stuck in your head. And then we can start to build that back up until we hit our real main peak, and then tear that down for an outro, and then move into our next song. That's what we're going for here. So now that I've got all this stuff, literally every single track unmuted, I can just wipe that all away when I switch to the next project. Also, a little trick that I pulled here, I've got my main lead melody filtered way down, so I can lift it over time to slowly introduce it. But I don't trust myself to remember which track that lead melody is on, so I have muted literally everything but my white noise whoosh, and that's always living on track 8, so I don't really have to worry about that. And track 5, which has the lead melody, so I can just go to my mixer and go, well, that's the only active track. I'm going to go and trust the process and lift my filter. Once I've got my filter lifted all the way up, it's time to switch to the next project. Because here's the other reason that I wanted to use projects. I don't want to have to babysit major changes to my song structure. So I need a few things to kick in all at once. I need a few of these tracks to come unmuted, and I need this bass here to switch to the chord progression thing. So from just a static bass, playing one note the whole time, to this that I showed you earlier. And yes, you could do all that with scenes, and you could even use this to save mute states within scenes, but I would much prefer to use projects because that way I'd never have to worry too much about remembering what I've muted and unmuted. I'd rather just switch to a new project that is kind of a fresh start so then I can keep building it back up. So I can bring in my lead. And I can also do stuff like lift my filter cutoff here, knowing full well that that'll get brought back down when I switch to this little build. And that build, by the way, is the final reason to use projects, is that I wanted to temporarily switch a track out to have a snare on it, and I wanted to automate its volume. And I didn't want to have to worry about then automating that volume on different patterns. I just wanted to be one and done. In this project and this project only, there is volume automation on that snare track. That automation gets kind of quarantined into this one project, and then we wipe that away when we go to this next project. And all my patterns are set to what I want them to be. All the tracks that I want to have muted are, in fact, muted. So, big picture, what we've done is we've built this intro up. We've broken it down to introduce the main hook. We've built the main hook up. Cool little build. And now we're finally ready for our second drop, and I can start building that back up again, this time with track 5 actually doing something. And once we're at peak for this song, every single track is playing to its fullest potential. We're ready to break back down for an outro, kind of wind things down in the reverse order that we built them up, and then go to the next song. The nice thing is because this project is kind of the minimum viable drop, so a pretty sparse drop, I can use it as my outro as well. And transition to the next song. Track 2 of this set is set up in much a similar way. We've got our kind of basic little intro with the exact same bass patch, just playing in a different key. And by the way, I just have this all set to chromatic, but then it's chromatic shifted up or down because I'm just picking sounds that sound nice and playing parts that sound nice at whatever pitch they happen to sound nice at. And so I have to be very flexible with pitch. One of the most annoying things about working on the rhythm in particular is getting different sounds to layer nicely on top of each other because you have to pitch them by ear, and sometimes it's weirdly hard to tell whether a sound lines up or not. So let me get rid of the tracks again. One trick I like to use to tell if sounds are in key with each other, where's my long bass, is to pitch stuff up. And now, okay, that clearly sounds in key. Let me bring that back down. So now, once I bring this all back to normal, I had a much easier time getting sounds, especially things like percussive elements, bass one shots, and bass growls to all be in key with each other by doing the pitch up and then eventually pitch back down method. If I got really stuck, I would play this bass line, say, on a different track, and then listen to both tracks at the same time. And you'll very quickly know whether your two one-shots are matched in key with each other or not. Regardless, the basic construction of this track is very similar to the first one, where you've got your bass, a little donk percussion thing, this extra neural bass sample, that little acid stab, a clap. But then here's a new thing that I want to show you. Because you can sidechain any track to any other track on the rhythm, I've been having a grand old time making these sidechained hi-hat patterns. In this case, there's a little bit of delay on that, so let me get rid of that. So without, sounds kind of janky. But with, that is, I think, really satisfying sounding. You could also do this with the velocity, of course, but I just really like the way the sidechain pumping sounds in particular, so I have these pumped hi-hats going all across the set. Then a little bit of delay is a little phasey, but a tiny bit is kind of nice. Moving on to the next track, very similar construction of the intro. A very similar patch. Not the same patch, but a very similar one. So move forward. And then finally, let's introduce another new thing. So this is fun. On the circuit rhythm, you can go into sample mode and you can choose whether or not to reverse a sound. So I've got this melody. And these big empty spaces that I didn't really know what to do with, but I realized having this exact same synth stab reversed to lead into each next section would sound really cool. And sure enough, and then I have a blank note trigger whenever the actual synth part triggers to immediately cut that reverse off. So that reverse can kind of kick in whenever it needs to, and then just immediately halt when the next note of this track kicks in. You'll also probably have noticed the very slow-moving bass track in order to just fit all four bass notes that I want to have on one pattern and not have to think about it too much. That doesn't really work for these melodies, but it's nice to save patterns while I can. So we build up. Very similar to the previous tracks, with these nice chords. Oh, but we can go farther. A lot of stuff going on the tracks. And you'll notice that I'm also playing a low bass note for this chord stack, which is kind of nice. And then, of course, I've got this other patch doubling the lead melody. And then I just have it ring out for this next transition. And this is fun. We've got a lot of automation going on in here. So I have very intentionally chained my patterns together in order to let this entire section run on autopilot, because there's way too much going on to manage. So ignore the tracks, it's not doing anything right now. So our kick is gone. So I've automated the pitch of my snare track in order to rise in pitch, and I have chained patterns together so that I get that one extra pattern at the end for that little clap part, which leads us into this, which is kind of fun. So as always, white noise whoosh, kick, percussion. Remember, you can switch between multiple samples on the circuit rhythm on one track, and so I'm making very liberal use of that. And also note that the different samples can be at different pitches, which is really helpful if, say, you want a percussive element and a bass wub to exist on the same track, but you want them to be at different pitches from each other. You can basically hold down an element to lock it. It turns this kind of light pink. And then you can go to note and then select which key it's on to lock it. And I use this all the time as well, especially when I want to have something like multiple bass growls or wubs stacked onto one track. So I'm once again using the sidechained hi-hat trick. I'm just switching between these four sounds, basically. Immediately brings it to life. This little acid part. Bunch of fun little combinations that you can get. Plus, our pal, microsteps. Pitch it up. A lot of uses for that. And then once again, this delay setting is pretty much all I used throughout the entire set, with one exception that I'll get into in a bit. Then I can kind of go for the dismount. And build into the next track in the set. I had a great time trying to bridge these together. Let me quickly run you through this, because this is the one that we heard in the intro. Kick. This delightful donk bass with a little bit of reverb. And a sub layer. This went a long way towards bringing it to life. And I think I've cut... I didn't actually need to cut any lows on this, actually. That right there is a drop. Then we keep building. But I did a couple of versions of sub bass. And then this other version. And I liked both. The first one was a little tighter, but this one hits a little harder. So I thought it would be fun to introduce the wimpier sub bass first, have it drop out, and then switch to the slightly more powerful one. Also note that muting it's really helpful here, because if I don't, it cuts off weird. You probably heard that little pop. I heard it too, and did not like it, and decided to just mute the track to make it go away. So we've got a few other elements here. Open hi-hat. Little percussion. You'll never guess how I got that sound. And then this just ridiculously pitched down a horn sample, and I've cut a bunch of lows in this case, and a whoop. And that's got some reverb on it as well. We keep building. And this is where the tracks finally comes in again. It's been kind of dormant for a bit. It's not doing that much, but it's kind of fun. And then a little bonus one. I didn't end up using this in the final version of the set, but I did make this fun little call and response bass house-ish thing that I wanted to show you. Tracks isn't doing anything, just the rhythm. So, some percussion. I've crammed a lot onto this one pattern. That's your response. So together. Everything else is kind of a bonus. The horn again. Some growls and wubs. So by itself, wait for it. Some just basic little filler elements, which are kind of fun. And there's not really a lot going on beyond that little idea, so I didn't work it into the set. Instead, I made this monstrosity. So one very funny thing about what I do is that a lot of stuff that I make gets lumped under the genre of techno, even though very little of it actually is techno. A lot of it's synthwave, there's some electro house. Not a lot of actual techno, though, and I've tried my hand at what you could call minimal techno, only to be told that's not techno at all. And I'm like, okay, fine. But regardless, this is me trying to make actual techno, and let me know if I did a good job or not. I'm genuinely curious. Because I think it's really fun. So real quick, this monster kick. These are definitely helped by some reverb. And in this case, I am deliberately not sidechaining these fast hi-hats. And then this is the one time that I'm using a different delay. I'm using this delay right here, which is like a slapback stereo delay, to give this sound some metallic nature. So here's without. Here's too much. Just give it a little bit of stereo width and a little bit of metallicness. And then we keep building that with this bass. And that escalates.
Enter the future.
Bring this bass back in. So on this device. Whoops. So this is slightly ridiculous, but I had a lot of fun making it, and every time that fast hi-hat comes in, it's kind of an adrenaline rush, so I think it works despite how ridiculous, or maybe because of how ridiculous it is. You'll have to let me know. And that's all of the building up of these hopefully club-friendly tracks on the circuits. If you'd like to hear the entire set performed in context, you can check this out up over here. And if you'd like to see the mechanics of combining both circuits, you can check out this video down over here. And of course, check out the link for this shirt in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.